Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the University of Maine at Presque Isle. I'm Ray Rice, and I'm the Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs here at the institution. I'd like to welcome all of you here tonight for a program we're very pleased to be able to share with our community, our Distinguished Lecturer Series. It's actually the last one of the year after a very successful numbers of lectures over the course of this past year. Our series has given us the opportunity to present a wide range of speakers, from astronauts and journalists to scholars and adventurers, for our campus and community since 1999. Bringing distinguished lecturers to campus, all of whom have made significant contributions in their fields, is part of our university's mission. This particular talk also serves as a kickoff and keynote address for our University Day, a day for us to celebrate our students' academic research, scholarly work, and community service. They must all be preparing last-minute work for University Day instead of being here right at this moment. Presentations will be held tomorrow. There are materials at the door if you want more details, and we invite all of you to join us for this free and very informative event happening all day tomorrow. The theme of this year's University Day is Disrupting the Status Quo, and tonight's speaker is a perfect example of this. One thing I'd like to do first, though, and that is recognize both the University Day Committee and the Distinguished Lecturer Series Committee for the hard work they do in order to make our DLS talks and University Day activities happen. Would all members of these committee members, if you're here, at least wave a little bit or something? So, I know a couple of you there back here. Thank you. There's Jason. Jim Keady is a nationally renowned educator and speaker in the area of social justice. Jim has spoken across the United States and at international venues to thousands of interested audience members. He has been sought out by members of the U.S. Congress, as well as university administrators, religious and union leaders, and student groups to offer his personal and professional experience and critiques on the issues of sweatshops, globalization, and social justice. Jim was a soccer coach for the St. John's University Red Storm, the men's NCAA Division I national champions, when he stood up against Nike and their sweatshops, and it cost him his job. Since then, he has made ending sweatshop labor his life mission. Many people ask the question, what is it like to live on a sweatshop wage in a developing country? Jim Keady found out. He spent 1 month in an Indonesian factory worker's slum, living on $1.25 a day, a typical wage paid to Nike's subcontracted workers. Today, he will share his personal stories of living with factory workers, and he will provide provocative analysis and clear direction on how we get involved in the fight to stop sweatshops. Please join me in welcoming Jim Keady to our campus.
Thank you. I'm going to start my presentation with a short film. Before I click over to that, can you do me a favor? Check your cell phones. Make sure they are on silent or vibrate. We'll keep them close by because we will use them later in the presentation. At like the age of 18, I was just on the track. Go to a good college, get a decent degree, do good, you're gonna get an entry-level job down on Wall Street, you're gonna work real hard, you're gonna get broke, you're gonna make tons of money, you're gonna be retired by a very young age, you're gonna have a house on the beach in New Jersey, and a couple of Mercedes and a trophy wife, and that'll be the end of the game. I'm done. Multi-millionaire, that's it. I was playing professionally for the New Jersey Imperials. I was playing the best soccer of my life. I get offered this coaching job by one of my teammates to go coach at St. John's University, the NCAA Division I national champions. They're the best team in the country. I was having a blast. I was loving coaching. I was loving playing. I'm living in New York. I'm also studying stuff that I really enjoy. I'm digging into like studying theology for the first time in my life in a formal way. I get online, I start doing searches about Nike, sweatshops, and labor practices. And what I found was, if you wanted to pick a company that completely violates everything that Catholic social teaching is about, Nike would be a perfect case study. And at the same time I'm doing this research, St. John's University Athletic Department starts to negotiate a $3.5 million endorsement deal with Nike that would require me as a coach to wear and promote the products. St. John's University is the largest Catholic institution in the country, coupling itself with the largest sportswear company in the world. And I said, how can we, as such a public symbol of Catholicism, do something that runs completely counter to our mission? Like, we're saying to the world then, look, you should care about the poor, and we should fight against injustice, and we should seek out the causes of poverty. Well, unless you're getting like some really good athletic equipment and $3.5 million along with it. I mean, you want to talk about just hypocrisy manifested in the real world. Like, this was it.
And you have the story at St. John's.
Keady has caused a massive pileup.
He is clearly an idealist.
I didn't go to St. John's University to work for Nike. I went there to coach and to study theology.
Keady, a devout Catholic, protested.
How does he reach the point where he thinks it's immoral to witness?
Because he's coming at it from a background of faith and religion. This isn't about just money or power or a job or anything. Think about this. How many of us on a job that we really want are prepared to get a memo from the boss saying, stop doing this or you're out, and you keep doing it?
I was given an ultimatum by my head coach: wear Nike and drop this issue or resign. End of story. So in June of 1998, I was constructively fired. People were telling me, you don't know what you're talking about, you know, those are great jobs, and you can live like a king or a queen of those wages, and those people are really happy to have those jobs. I want to go find out. Doesn't everybody just want to know the truth? So I wanted to know the truth firsthand. I wanted to see it, I wanted to smell it, I wanted to hold it in my hand. I knew I was going to need other people. Leslie was a natural match.
Jim and I went to college together. We came together ultimately because we share an interest in labor rights issues.
I eventually met back up there a few years after school through an email about sweatshops.
I really wanted to be working with these issues.
And I wrote to my buddy and said, you know, who's this woman that's writing to you about this stuff? And he said, oh, she's nuts like you know, you should email her. And she was actually en route to go work with Mother Teresa's sisters in India. And I sent her off his email, hey, I got this great idea, let's go start on Nike's wages in Indonesia.
And so he's like, I really need to go.
And she wrote me back, sounds great.
Let's go.
We plopped down in Tangerang, Indonesia, this industrial suburb outside of the capital of Jakarta, with the plans that for the next month we were going to live as Nike's factory workers lived, which meant that we were going to go live in a workers' slum outside of the capital. And we were going to live on the workers' wages, $1.25 a day for the next month, to try and come maybe to a better understanding of what it's like for Nike factory workers to make this kind of money and live under these conditions. We lived in a 9x9 cement box. It was over 100 degrees, it's 100% humidity, a small window, certainly no air conditioning.
No furniture. You slept on a very thin mat on an uneven cement floor covered in shelf paper.
The streets outside of your home are lined by open sewers, and what that means, like in the rainy season, you would have all that feces just float up into the streets and into your house.
And every time that you go to the bathroom, it comes back out into the sewer for everybody else to see and smell.
You would have football-sized rats that would stampede over the ceiling at night and come up through the toilet and look for stuff to eat in the house. Or the fist-sized cockroaches that would crawl over you at night.
Siapa nama Anda? Saya. Nama Jim. Nama Jim ya.
Just like anyone around the world, you can't just drop into someone's life and be like, hi, we're here, we want to live in your life and tell us how much it sucks. you had to build bonds of trust.
Jim, Siri, Jenny, nice to meet you.
They treated us very politely, and it wasn't until they saw that we were committed in the capacity of living on the wages that they're forced to live on, in the conditions that they are living in, that they felt that they could start to begin to trust us. And you get to know them, and you hold their children, and you eat with them, and you share stories with them. They become part of your family.
We would go to different workers' homes. You got like 4 women sleeping in an 8x8 cement box, and all their possessions are in there, like everything, in this small area.
The workers would have to share a bathroom with 5 to 10 other families. The workers would have to share living quarters, actually like a row of shacks with corrugated tin roofs. All those families would share a laundry corner and a kitchen facility, and they would all share the same well to take the water out of.
$1.25 a day after you've paid for your rent, water, electricity, any major transportation costs, you're going to be left on average with roughly 7,000 rupiah per day. What the hell does that mean? That's going to buy you 2 simple meals of rice and vegetables, a bag of peanuts, a bottle of iced tea, and some dish detergent. And that's all you can get. And that's your reward?
Without a doubt. We found it out in the first week that we were there. There's no way that you can live on $1.25 a day and maintain your human dignity. It's just not possible.
I lost 25 pounds living on Nike's wages in Indonesia. I spent the month painfully hungry and tired and near the point of exhaustion most days.
I just felt my energy storage was just depleted, and I just started going downhill fast, and I just started getting sick every day.
And she got very sick with this. She had like a fever of like 104, and she's got to deal with, well, I have a fever of 104. I can buy aspirin and like a little drink box to get some vitamin C, but if I buy those 2 things, I don't eat for the rest of the day.
I don't know what this is gonna do. Because we're gonna go home, we're gonna say, like, this is not enough money, you know it's gonna do anything different.
How do you feel like a human being? How do you feel like your work, your gifts? For them and the workers that I've talked to the last couple of days, a number of them said like the only thing we have is our physical labor. Because I just bought this smallest thing of shaving cream and 1 razor that I might be able to use 2 or 3 times that I have to cut out 3 meals this week. How does it feel?
They will be working overtime hours just to get by, because they can't possibly get by on the wages that they're paid without working incredible amounts of overtime. And when you're working up to 15 hours a day, 6 to 7 days a week, your 2-year-old child just doesn't see you. They don't get to see their children.
The kids can't even go to school. How are you going to break a cycle of poverty and have real economic development if you have a whole lost generation of children that aren't even educated? I'm walking down this dirt path into this village, and I see this massive pile of scrap shoe rubber that I later learned came from one of Nike's factories, and piles like that get dumped there all the time, and the end result of these piles is that they get burned in that village in the big open space where kids play, and the burning fumes I learned from the company that designs Nike shoe rubber will give off toxins and carcinogens. Kids are paying the price, and they're the ones with chest infections, and they're the ones that are going to develop cancer. When we were in Indonesia, we made attempts to get into a Nike factory because Nike claims on their website we have nothing to hide.
I'm like, how you doing?
We went over to Nike's corporate offices, and Nike denied us that.
We're unable to accommodate that request.
So,
Nike headquarters in Beaverton, Oregon had faxed an info sheet out to all factories to be placed on the wall for all workers to see that read, if you are approached by
Jim Keady, Leslie Kretzer, and Mike Pirantosi, do not speak to them. They're only to speak to management. There will be severe consequences if you're found talking to them.
And they know from their management how they're supposed to act. And if they don't, there's some severe ramifications. Anywhere from significant harassment to death. And I mean that in a very literal sense. Certainly, management of the factory didn't want us to be there, and it was kind of frightening because we several times tried to get into the factory.
We weren't out of the van for more than 3 minutes, and there was security like surrounding us, and then the factory managers came out.
What's going on? We're outside a Nike shoe factory right now. Security's kind of surrounded us.
They're like, what are you doing? Well, why are you here? It was frightening, because who knows?
Security guy here tracking us down.
From that moment, we were tailed by factory security, the Praemen, the local mafia. The local mafia certainly works in conjunction with these factory bosses. Factory bosses some of them are just brutal, ruthless, hired muscle to keep workers in line. We met with one worker, Giulianto. He told us because he was union organized and he was trying to form an independent union.
He was threatened at gunpoint. He had his house ransacked. He was given death threats, and he had to flee back to his home village because, in fear of his life. This is literally a life and death issue, and this happens at all the factories.
Every worker that we talk to, there's struggled with this fear, this culture of fear that just permeates the air. That, they want to tell you the truth and try and fight for their rights, but they also want their kids to have a father or a mother. They're dealing every day with the threat of losing their lives for doing this kind of work. I mean, they show tremendous courage in light of that. We were able to meet with a woman by the name of Dita Sari, who had been organizing Nike and Reebok factory workers at the age of 23 and was illegally jailed and put in prison and tortured.
In 8th of July 1996, I was arrested by the army, the local army in East Java. They kicked me and they used their fists and their sticks and their boots to hurt me and to torture me in front of the workers to show them an example.
I think that the majority of workers are saying, look, we don't want you to pull out the jobs. We want to work. We like to work, we want to make the shoes. We're proud of what we do, but we don't want to be exploited. Why can't you just let us meet our basic needs?
We're talking about food, clothing, housing, healthcare, education, being able to take care of your kids, and some modest savings. That's not a tall order.
Excuse me, you guys know where the Nike campus is?
Yeah, take it right on Walker.
Yep.
You'll see it on your southwest corner.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so we're on Nike's campus right now. It's a little bit different than the factories in Indonesia, just a tiny bit.
Hi, Chris.
Nice to meet you, finally.
Yeah.
Listen, I was hoping we could set up some time and we could talk. I'm really concerned about the workforce in Indonesia. It's spent the summer there living with them and living on the wages they pay to the factory workers.
You worried about that?
Yeah.
Okay, why didn't you call my secretary? Let's do it.
I did. I called Lisa last week. I called Beta. I called Dusty. I called Brad Feigl. I called Amanda.
Maybe we talk to them.
Man, you're the guy that works stops with you, right?
Yeah, don't start with me.
No, man. I don't know who else to talk to. I tried.
That's the kid.
You just want to talk to me.
Well, then I guess you don't get to do it.
So you're the guy, man. You're the man that needs to.
I appreciate your concern, but I'm having lunch with a friend.
I know I'm right. I apologize for interrupting lunch. I mean, I've come all the way from New Jersey to talk to you like this. So
I'm not talking to you.
I've got Stonewall that every town. You know, the workers had asked of me that I try to bring you back to Indonesia to meet them in their homes, not in, you know, the office in Jakarta.
You understand? No. You just gotta know. I'm not gonna talk to you about it.
Phil Knight, the CEO of Nike, or Michael Jordan, or Tiger Woods, or Mia Hamm, or any of the other people that are really making a lot of money because of the way that Nike does things, should care about these workers because they're human beings.
When I see people like Tiger Woods get $100 million just for wearing the clothes, we're saying as a society, like this one individual, because they play golf well, is worth more than 700,000 people.
Here's what he makes.
We've made up these wage charts and have them look down at it and then look up and say, Tiger Woods makes enough in a second to buy me a house. Why? I work hard for the company too. And, you know, what do you say to it? Well, hey, that's the system. Deal with it, you know, suck it up. It's capitalism, survival of the fittest. Guess you're not the fittest. Nike is in Indonesia for one reason: cheap labor.
It's an ideology of maximizing profit at all costs to humanity and nature. And it's this entire, like, a vicious cycle that starts with the heads of the corporations that want to make a great return on shareholders' investment.
Some people say, well, hey, that's the way things are. That's the American way. It's capitalism. That's the American way. No, the American way is democracy. That's what our country was founded on. A belief that all people are equal, that there should be a respect for democracy, for human rights, and for the protection of human life. That's what we're about as Americans. We've spent the last year and a half traveling around the country, visiting over 100 schools, high schools and universities, 15,000 students.
So how are you feeling about the turnout?
I feel pretty good about the turnout.
What are you thinking about the turnout here?
That's great. This is the best possible turnout.
And we try as best we can to introduce them to these human beings and say, as students, as high school athletes, as college athletes, as consumers, we've got tremendous power. And because we can't fly them over to Indonesia, we bring Indonesia to them. And if we can give them that spark, even if it's one or two on that day, that's going to multiply. And eventually, we'll reach this critical mass. And we'll have a great harvest. And the harvest will be truth and justice and fairness for all people. Something's wrong here, and we can fix it. It's a necessity.
The tipping point is now.
At this point in our history, we need a story like this to be told.
Okay, so now that you have a sense of the conditions in which Nike products are produced and the conditions in which the workers who produce Nike's products have to live, I want to talk to you a little bit more about Nike as a company. In the world of sports, Nike's got the best athletes in the world endorsing their products. For those of us who are athletes, we know they have some of the best product out there, and they most certainly have some of the coolest commercials to try to entice us to buy their products. In the world of finance, Nike's revenues last year, over $30 billion. Profits, $3.2 billion. So by most measurements in the mainstream of America, particularly in the worlds of sports and business, when people look at the Nike Corporation, they say, wow, Nike's really a successful company. But I would hope as Americans that we have a different measuring stick for success, that it is not purely about product and profit. I would hope that we also care about people. And in this case, the people I hope we care about are the more than 1 million workers in 679 factories in 43 countries around the world that produce the real wealth for Nike. And when I say real wealth, I mean the stuff you can touch with your hands, put on your feet, pull over your head. We need to ask questions about whether or not these workers are paid a fair day's wage for a fair day's work. Whether or not their basic human right to freely associate is respected. And if they do freely associate and they decide to form a trade union, that the union is bargained with in good faith. So very simply, along with product and profit, we have to have that third P, people, on equal footing. Now, how many of you heard something about Nike and their sweatshops before you showed up for this presentation tonight? Heard something about this issue? Okay. Did anyone hear anything along these lines? Or, Nike sweatshops? Dude, that issue's like almost 20 years old. And I heard Nike fixed all their problems, and they're now a model of corporate social responsibility. Has anybody heard that? One woman shaking her head there, yes. The reason that people have heard it, the reason that people believe it, the reason that unfortunately college professors and business programs all over the country teach that, is because Nike lies. I'll give you an example. After I did my experiment, trying to live like a factory worker, live on the wages, I go to the Sydney Olympics and partnered with some groups there, and we did this grassroots campaign challenging Nike. They were the lead Olympic sponsor, and I was saying as an athlete that Nike was undermining the Olympic ideal of promoting peace and justice through sports by the way they were having their products produced in sweatshops in Indonesia. And Nike shot back in response with a very well-crafted public relations statement. They said those people in the Olympics talking about sweatshops, they got the right issue, they just have the wrong company. Saying, yeah, sweatshops exist, but Nike doesn't have any. And they said this PR line over and over and over again. Fast forward, 5 years later, and because of pressure that was placed on Nike by college students from all over the country, they had to start dealing with this issue in a little bit more concrete way than a PR statement. So they sent some researchers out to the field to see what's going on. Now, I would argue that the methodology that was employed by the Nike researchers was flawed, but even with the flawed methodology, Nike's own people found that in up to 50% of the factories, workers were reporting verbal, physical, sexual, and/or psychological abuse. In up to 100% of the factories, the work hours exceeded Nike's code of conduct. Fast forward beyond that, into 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, and we have continued reports of abuse. Verbal abuse, workers being called pig, dog, monkey. It may not sound too bad to us, but in Indonesia, the largest Muslim country in the world, those are some horrible things to say to someone. Physical abuse, workers being kicked, slapped, scratched, hit with shoe parts. Workers being forced to work overtime, being cheated out of the wages they shouldn't have gotten paid for that overtime. Good old-fashioned union busting. And the sources of these reports are the Associated Press, Educating for Justice, that's me, the Fair Labor Association, which was a front group that was started by Nike to look into this stuff, even they found it, and Nike themselves, after being put under pressure by the Associated Press, had to disclose internal documents that had all this stuff in it. So going back 16 years ago at the Olympics, we absolutely had the right issue, and we most certainly had the right company. And unfortunately, many of these abuses continue right up until today. Now, why do I focus on Nike? Sometimes people ask me. Or if they're a real sneakerhead and they love their Nikes, like, why are you picking on Nike? And I always find that charge somewhat comical, that I'm picking on Nike. Given that Nike's a $30 billion transnational corporate empire, and I'm a one-man nonprofit working out of my apartment at the beach in New Jersey with a budget last year of like $25,000. So I'm not sure how I pick on any corporate giant. You know, this is a David versus Goliath fight. I can't even afford the rocks to put in my slingshot. Now, the reason I focus on Nike, as you can see by this slide, is that they dominate this industry. Okay, they are also one of the top 50 brands in the world. They produce 50,000 different types of product, or 500,000, excuse me, different types of product each year, and they sell those products in more than 160 countries around the world. This is a transnational corporate empire, and they exercise imperialist values, values that run completely counter to the values that we believe in as a democratic republic here in the United States. Now, why do I focus on Indonesia? Indonesia is one of the largest producers of Nike product in the world. They have 45 factories there, more than 194,000 workers producing their stuff. Indonesia is very strategically important for Nike. They're in the number 3 slot in terms of production right now, third only to Vietnam and China. By the end of this year, they have projected them to move into the number 2 slot. They've made a massive investment between 2011 and 2016 to build new factories out in Indonesia as opposed to in Vietnam and China. So this is as important a spot in Nike's global supply chain as it gets. So our organizing strategy in working on this has been fairly straightforward. Let's look at one industry leader, Nike, in one strategic country, Indonesia, and win. And by winning, I mean we would get collective bargaining agreements, union contracts, and part of the deal would include a living wage component. And then once we win, we now have a model that can be scaled and replicated. And we go from Nike in Indonesia to Nike in Vietnam, Vietnam to China, China to Thailand, Thailand to India, India to Mexico, Mexico to Honduras. We hit the 43 countries where Nike operates. Then we go from Nike to Adidas. We go from Adidas to Reebok. We go from Reebok to the Gap. Then we go from clothes and shoes to electronics, like these things I'm holding in my hands, made in sweatshops. Our cell phones, our iPhones, our iPads, all made in sweatshops. We go from electronics to toys, the stuff that we buy for our little brothers and sisters or our children around the holidays for their birthdays, all made in sweatshops. We go from toys to housewares, the stuff that we're buying at Walmart and Kmart and Target and Kohl's, all made in sweatshops. And what we're going to do is build a global labor movement that will balance off the globalization of capital that has gobbled up communities and in some instances countries, all in the pursuit of maximizing profits for absentee owners, also known as shareholders. We're starting with a fairly modest approach, looking at one company in one country to see if we can get the win and create the model for change. Now, has there been any progress? I've been working on this since 1997, almost 20 years. I would hope I could stand in front of you and say, yeah, we've been able to accomplish something in that time period. A couple points of progress. Menstrual leave. Indonesian women, by law, are guaranteed 2 paid days off every month when they have their period. Now, usually women in the United States hear that, and they're like, sign me up for that program, right? Okay, the reason it was put into place, in theory, right? We've got a production line, and product starts here, and it goes all the way down the line, and it ends there, okay? If there's a young woman in the middle of the line who happens to have her period, she's going to have to get up and go to the ladies' room a number of times during her shift. Well, production's not stopping. The sneakers start to pile up. Efficiency isn't being maximized. Bad for business. Better that you stay home for the 2 days. We will adjust production while you're gone, come back and ready to work. In practice, what was happening for these young women to get their legally guaranteed menstrual leave days off, they had to go through their line chief and the chain of command, which was humiliating enough, eventually getting to the factory clinic where you had to pull your pants down and show blood in your underwear to prove you were menstruating to get the 2 days off. Because of the advocacy that we did on this issue and exposing this, that has stopped. That's progress. For the tens of thousands of women that had to go through that humiliating process that no longer have to do that to get their legally guaranteed break, we made a difference. Another area of progress is with regard to the physical abuse of union organizers. You saw in the video, Giuliano threatened for his union organizing. Now, before I get into the specifics of this, just very generally, you say the word union in the United States these days, and at times there's this negative visceral reaction. Unions are bad, they're killing our economy, they artificially drive up wages, unions suck, rah! Has anybody heard anything like that before? Yes, there's all the Fox News watchers, right? Okay. Couple quick questions. How many people here like weekends? Who likes weekends? Yes? All right. How many people here like, if you have access to a health care plan, you like having good health care? Yes? All right. How many people here are employed along with going to school? You have a job, part-time as well, full-time? Okay. So, do you ever make a mistake at your job?
Yes.
Yeah, never stop it. Everybody does, right? You've made a mistake, I've made a mistake. Isn't it cool when you make a mistake at your job that your boss isn't allowed to beat you for it?
Yes.
Pretty good, right? Yeah. Do you know who we have to thank for these 3 gains in the workplace? You can say it louder, it's okay. Unions, yes, the American labor movement, the people that brought you the weekend. Another reason that unions are important. What's your first name again? I'm sorry. Emma. Okay, Emma. Let's pretend that you're a menstrual leave girl, right? You went through that humiliating process. You wanted to get the day off. You come home and you tell some of your female roommates about what happened. And it turns out that your other 2, 3 roommates, they went through the process too, but they just felt so humiliated and embarrassed they couldn't even talk about it. You're the strongest one in the group, Emma, so they're like, you got to go in and tell the boss this has to change tomorrow. So Emma does that. She comes into the factory at 7 o'clock in the morning. Her shift is about to start. She should be at her station on the line, but she walks into the boss's office, or it's not on the boss, and she puts her foot down and says, I am not making another pair of sneakers until we sort this menstrual leave policy out. It's a violation of my rights as a woman, my basic human rights, and my worker rights. As the boss, I might say to Emma, don't let the door hit you in the rear end on the way out. The unemployment rate's through the roof. There's 500 people sitting out there that take your job in a heartbeat. You may want to think about any demands you're placing on me. Does Emma have much power in this situation as I have described it? No. But could you imagine if, when Emma came in to the boss's office and put her foot down, that in solidarity with her, 7,000 workers stood up on the factory floor and said, not another sneaker's leaving this factory today until we get this menstrual leave policy changed. Does she have power now? Yes. It's the power of collective bargaining. It's the power of a trade union. And it's necessary at times to balance off the powers of capital and management. This guy here, his name is Rahmat. Rahmat works at PT Nikomas. It's the largest shoe production plant in Indonesia. 75,000 workers producing primarily for Nike, but also for Adidas and Puma. What Rahmat is holding in his hands there is one of his shirts. The stain you see on it is his blood from the morning he went off to the factory after being warned about organizing his friends, and he's going across the dirt path to the gates of the plant, and he's jumped from behind by praymen, hired thugs, and he's beaten in the back of the head with a machete and left to die in his own pool of blood in the gutter as an example. Now, luckily for Rahmat and his wife and daughter, you see here, he did not die that day. And I've had a chance to talk with Rahmat a number of times over the years. And in one of our last conversations, he had shared with me that this kind of physical intimidation of the union organizers at Nike's factories had stopped. And he specifically attributed its stopping to the cross-border solidarity work that was done by college students from the United States, using their voice to put public pressure on Nike and demand that this kind of stuff not happen anymore. And that's the kind of power that we have to impact change literally half a world away. Okay, another area where we have seen some progress is case by case with union busting. I call these guys the Nike 9. They were organizing at a Nike plant just wanting better wages, working conditions, a better contract. They were all illegally fired. Some were arrested, all brought in for questioning. We got 8 of them a settlement. 1 is still floating out there. That was a pretty good win. And we've had a number of high-profile cases over the last 2 years. And each time we win one, it's another point of progress that the workers can build upon and continue to exercise their power. We had a big victory in 2012. I documented a case in 2011 where Nike, at one of the plants, the workers are being forced to work 2 to 3 hours of overtime a day, 6 days a week, for 17 years, and they hadn't been paid for that labor. Back in the napkin calculations, they were cheated out of about $100 million of wages. So we documented all the facts of the case. pushed it through over the course of a year, went through all the different channels, eventually took it to the media, and we won a settlement for those workers. Now, Indonesian law only allows us to go back 2 years for redress. It wasn't what the workers should have deserved, but what it did was it drew a line in the sand. And this practice of what in Indonesian they call jam malur, jam means hour, malur means delay. These hours that were delayed without getting paid, doesn't happen anymore. Progress. Another point of progress, in 2013, the Indonesian government raised the minimum wage by 40%. Despite the fact that Nike had done high 20s, I think it was 27, 28 billion that year in revenues, they were claiming poverty and that they couldn't afford the new minimum wage. So that the way that they would get around paying the new minimum wage, you would either have to have the union committee at one of the plants sign off on the deal, it was the leadership of the union, or I believe it was 90% of the rank and file workers on the floor would have to sign off on the deal. So there was this one factory in Sukabumi, Indonesia. Management said, we want to pay you less than the new minimum wage. Union committee said, no way, this is the law, you guys can afford it, Nike can afford it, pay us what we're due under the law. So they tried to get around the union committee by going to rank and file workers on the floor. And the management would go onto the factory floor, flanked by 2 members of the Indonesian military, the TNI. Now you got to know the history here. You know, if someone from our armed forces walked into the room right now and sat down in one of these chairs, it wouldn't be a big deal. Maybe make some people feel safer. Not the case in Indonesia. Okay, the TNI was responsible, in working with the Suharto regime that was in power up until 1998, one of the most brutal modern military dictatorships, slaughtered 500,000 Indonesians, 250,000 East Timorese. The TNI were not good guys. So when they show up, it's not to make people feel safe, it's to intimidate people. So here I am, the factory manager, and I've got 2 guys from the TNI, and I've got a young woman who's got a marginal high school education at best, who knows she needs this job, and I'm putting a paper in front of her saying, you need to sign this. What do you think they're going to do? They're going to sign it. Now, luckily for the workers at the factory, one of the union committee members clandestinely filmed this. I happened to be in Indonesia at the time. They reached out to me. I went out to Sukabumi, got the video clips, sat with workers that were intimidated, sat with the union committee, documented all the facts of the case, brought it back to Jakarta, partnered with one of my NGO partners there. We did a giant press conference, had all the international media there, hammered them in the press for 2 days, and by the 3rd day, they were getting paid the new minimum wage. Progress. For the 7,000 workers at that factory, just that year alone, that was another $1 million in wages that they collectively got. Okay, an area where we have seen mixed progress is with regard to Nike's disposal of their scrap shoe rubber. You saw in the video that I stumbled upon this issue. Now, if you go to NikeBiz.com and you print out their corporate social responsibility report, you better have a lot of paper in your printer because it's going to be like that thick. And 1/3 of that document is going to talk about Nike's claimed commitments to their environmental stewardship. They want to lower CO2 emissions, do what's called closed-loop manufacturing, all these things that sound wonderful on paper. So you would think that if they were that committed, that if they got a call or an email from somebody saying, yeah, you got scrap shoe rubber from your factories being dumped and burned in villages, it's kind of bad, that they'd want to fix it. Now, Nike was too busy when I first put them on notice back in 2000 doing what I call cause marketing. They were signing partnerships with the World Wildlife Fund, the UN Climate Savers Program. They're signing on to the CIRS principles to protect the environment. And every time they sign on to one of these deals, there would be a press conference or the press release goes out, and it all sounds wonderful. And there's the giant Nike swoosh next to these very well-respected NGO logos. And if you're flipping through the news that night, you just hear, today, Nike signed a partnership with the World Wildlife Fund to help protect the environment, blah, 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 blah. And in your head, you're like, the World Wildlife Fund? Those are the panda bear people. They'll never let Nike hurt the environment. And we trust it. And we shouldn't. Because now we're more than a decade out when these initiatives first started being put into place, and the data shows that they have done nothing to protect the environment. All they have done is give greenwashing corporate cover to these giant corporations to continue to pollute the environment in the way that they have. So I go back to Indonesia, 2001. I find more dump sites, bigger piles. 2002, more dump sites, bigger piles. This was Nike's official response to me talking about this back in 2002. This was after I did my talk in Dartmouth. This is Public Relations 101. I will break it down for you. In the first paragraph, we feel the need to address Nike's environmental sustainability efforts. Through our unique reuse a shoe collection program, Nike recycles over 2 million pairs of athletic shoes annually and converts them into sports courts for kids to play soccer, basketball, tennis, or whatever sport can be supported at that facility. Awesome program. And I would encourage you to get it set up here on your campus. Contact Nike. They'll send you some of these boxes when people have shoes that are worn out. Instead of them going into the trash, which then ends up in a landfill, Nike will take them. They separate the uppers, they get the rubber part, they grind it up, and I don't know, I didn't get a chance to get around campus while I was here. Do you have like an artificial turf field here on campus? Yes? No? Running track?
Yeah.
Yes? You know the rubber that coats a running track? Sometimes you see, you know, like new playgrounds. That could be Nike regrind. Awesome reuse of the product. Does that have anything to do with scrap shoe rubber being burned in Indonesia? No, but do you see the seeds they're planting in your head here? Nike recycles shoes. Then they make the jump. Nike recycled shoes, the disposal of footwear sold by burning, Mr. Keady discusses in his presentation, are either counterfeit or unauthorized. Counterfeit or unauthorized. This was right behind a Nike factory. To my left from this picture here was an open field 3 football fields deep. Piles of shoe rubber, burn spots on the ground. I've got the videotapes of the trucks rolling in and the women pushing the stuff off the trucks, saying they've been dumping stuff there every day, twice a day. At that point, it was for 20 years. It'd be even more than that now. So I continue to put Nike on notice about this one. 2008, 8 years after I first tell them about it, I get a phone call. Nike wants to meet with me. So we set up a meeting with a couple of women from their corporate social responsibility division. I had this meeting in Manhattan, and I sat down at a table in a restaurant in the East Village and pretty much did this presentation, just sitting there. And they were really interested in this part of it. And I said, look, if you don't believe me, you don't trust me, I get it. It's fine. It's not rocket science to do this research. Go sit outside one of your factories. Don't let them know you're coming. Wait for the dump trucks to leave, and you follow. See what you find. So they did just that. They had one of their top executives in Asia sit outside an Indonesian factory, wait for the dump trucks to leave. They follow those trucks to a site where eventually they had to clean up 180 dump truck loads of scrap shoe rubber and spend a couple $100,000 in the environmental remediation of the site. That's just one site from one factory in a country that they were on notice for 8 years. What's happening in China, Vietnam, India, when nobody's watching the shop? Now, from that experience that the Nike executive had came Nike's new footwear waste management system. They're going to target 48 kinds of waste, segregate it on the factory floor, measure it, collect it, send it out to various sites. The E2 teams, that sounds sexy, right? They're going to validate the data, and then they report back to corporate every quarter with their E2 audits. 2009, I'm back in Indonesia. This time I am with the director from Nike's corporate responsibility division that met with me in New York City. Took me over a decade to get somebody from Nike over there in the field to see what was going on. She was in tears. Her name is Caitlin Morris. Caitlin was in tears 3 different times during the week we spent together there. Was in shock for most of the week. But because I was with a director from Nike for the first time, now I got into factories for the first time. And did they want to show me the new footwear waste management system? And they brought me around the factory floor, and Jim, here's where, this is the waste that gets targeted, and then it goes here, and then it'll go over there, then it goes out to there, and it goes in the trucks, and some's going to go to this site, and some's going to go here, and you can be very proud you helped us move this along. And I said, that's great. We'll see. 6 months later, I'm back in Indonesia. I sit outside one of the factories that I had been given the tour of the new footwear waste management system. And I wait for the dump trucks to leave. Only had to go about 2 kilometers to this dump site, where the guys at the site shared with me that this is what happens to that scrap shoe rubber every day, 4 o'clock. Now, I have brought some of the shoe parts home with me at times from the dumps. A little bit of a wacky souvenir, right? But I have a colleague he's out at the University of California at Berkeley. He used to be at MIT. His name is Dara O'Rourke. Dara is a global expert on supply chain management issues in the global athletic footwear industry. Talk about a niche market, right? Dara has been hired at times by Nike to help them manage their supply chain. He knows these materials. He's the best guy in the world to talk to about it. So I brought some of these parts from the dumps and I put them on his desk and I said, if we lit this stuff on fire, what would happen? He said it'd be bad. You burn that stuff, open flame, slowly, low heat, you're going to release some pretty nasty toxins and carcinogens. So what is in that black cloud of smoke right there? Nasty toxins and carcinogens, right? To the left of the smoke, you can see there's an open green space there. You may be able to make it out all the way in the back before the tree line. There's a soccer goal. That's a soccer field. Who plays on soccer fields? Kids. What are they breathing in every day at 4 o'clock? Toxins and carcinogens. To the right of the cloud of smoke, there's another green field over there. Those are rice paddies. Toxic smoke goes up, acid rain comes down into the water, into the soil, into the rice. How many people here eat rice? Do we have a personal vested interest in trying to clean up this corporate pollution? Yes. So, I published these photos and a lot more, did a report on this, sent one of my team members out a month later to that dump site, and it was cleaned up. Progress. I'm back in Indonesia 6 months after that. To give this some scale, I am 6'4". This was one of the worst dump sites. This was in May of 2012. Yeah, May 2012 or 2013. It was one of the worst sites because of the size of it, the materials that were there, but most importantly for me because of its location. It sat right on the edge of the river. And my fear was that when the rainy season hit, that this stuff would just get washed into the river and into the watershed. Now, take note of the tree that is in the middle of this picture. Okay, this is in May. I'm back in Indonesia in January, during the middle of the rainy season. The picture that's in the middle of, or the tree rather, that's in the middle of this picture, is the tree that's in the middle of this picture. The entire dump got washed into the watershed. So we have a little ways to go with regard to progress on this issue with Nike. Okay. How many people, either now or at some point in your life, have owned a pair of Nike sneakers? Keep the hands up, look around the room. If Nike was here, they'd be very happy. All right, when I was a senior in high school, back in 1989, and I was playing basketball at Christian Brothers Academy, this all-boys Catholic powerhouse in the center of New Jersey. Back in 89, when I was playing basketball for CBA, I had a high-end pair of Nike high tops. Back then, they cost about $75 a pair. Does anyone here own the latest pair of LeBron James? It's okay if you do, I won't beat you up. All right, those cost well over $200 a pair, although they come with a carrying case and promotional CD-ROM. Now, whether it is a lower-end pair of cross trainers or the high-end pair of LeBrons, those shoes cost on average $16.25 for Nike to produce. $10.75 on the materials, $2.43 in the labor, overhead $2.10, factory profit 97 cents. A couple of interesting stories about this slide. So Nike tracks where I go and do my presentations, and they track any media that comes out of it. So I did my presentation, this is years ago, at the University of Minnesota at Morris. And the student newspaper wrote up a big story, front page story the next day, and the student reporter really focused in on this cost analysis and breakdown. I get an email from one of the people on Nike's corporate responsibility team. Hey Jim, just saw the article about your lecture at the University of Minnesota. The guys in the sourcing division are a little upset because they're wondering, where are you getting this data from? So where did you get your numbers from on the shoe breakdown? I said, can you go back to the guys in sourcing and tell them that I got it off of your website? You won't find this on NikeBiz.com anymore. When I was in Indonesia in 2009 with the director from Nike, and I got access to the factories, I got to sit with factory managers for the first time. I wanted to double check my data. I didn't have a fancy setup like this. I was lucky if I had a marker and some butcher paper or a whiteboard. And I'd start writing down the breakdown, and the factory managers, no. Your number's too high. Nike only pays us $10 to $11 per unit. And they've been paying us the same amount for 20 years. Now it will be over 25. So can you see how you can grow a company from a couple $100 million in revenues to over $30 billion if you can flatline your wholesale costs over a 25-year arc and increase your high-end retail in that same time period? And doesn't this bust one of the myths of globalization that the market fundamentalists try to sell to us? Isn't the idea that we lower the barriers to trade, we pump in the foreign direct investment, the foreign money comes in to invest and build these factories. We're going to build factories where there were once just family farms, and we're going to get all those young women into the real economy, whatever that means, right? And they're going to produce products. We're going to get cheaper labor, yes, but it means that we'll pass the cost savings on to you as the consumer, and then the profits will go to the shareholders, and at the end we all hold hands and sing Kumbaya, right? Isn't that what we're told? How many people here would say that in your lifetime your Nike sneakers have gotten any cheaper? They go up every year, right? Aren't we supposed to be getting cheaper products because they're exploiting cheap labor? The comparative advantage, as the economists call it? Well, I can tell you that Phil Knight, the chairman of the board and the founder of Nike, the guy that owns 90% of Class A shares of stock and 30% of Class B shares of Nike stock, his net worth has gone through the roof in that time period, right? So the corporate execs are making money, the corporate leadership's making money, the corporate investors are making money, and the people that are at the base of the pyramid that are the only ones that actually generate real wealth continue to grind it out in abject poverty. There's something wrong with that equation. And the workers aren't asking to be billionaires. They just want to work 5 days, have 2 days off, and be able to afford to take care of their kids. That's not a crazy demand. And the money is there to do that. Now from this, what do they make? Right? It's a good question to ask. From this $2.43 of labor is generated, it generates rather, the pool of money from which workers' salaries get paid. So here's a basic wage for workers in Indonesia. This is a sample one. 2.3 million rupiah, about 212, depending on the exchange rate on any given day. Last time I did the calculations, it's about $212. But don't worry about what it is in dollars, because you don't pay for stuff in dollars. You're paying for it in rupiah if you're a factory worker in Indonesia. So what can you afford with your $2,340,000 per month salary? Your rent is going to cost you $500,000. Your drinking water for the month is going to cost you $200,000. Transportation costs $500,000. Add those three up, it's $1.2 million. Take the $1.2 million, subtract it from the $2.34 million, and you're going to be left with $1.140 million. And if you divide that, the 1,140,000 rupiah by the average amount of days in a month, which is 30, well done, you are going to have 38,000 rupiah per day to pay for all of your living expenses beyond these three. How many people here like to eat? Enjoy eating? Yes? Okay. You will get one meal at the factory. Sometimes the rice has worms in it, the meat's rotten, vegetables are lowest quality that they can get. Beggars can't be choosers. You got a deal. You're going to get two other meals. simple meal of rice, vegetables, and a piece of chicken or a piece of fish, that's going to cost you 15,000 rupiah. 15,000 times 2, 30,000. If you wanted to wash one of these meals down with something other than the water that you have, maybe you buy a local brand of iced tea, cheapest thing you can get, 3,000 rupiah. 2 meals, 30,000, plus 1 bottle of iced tea, 33,000. How much do we have for the day? 38. You got 5,000 left. How many people here use soap? You use soap? All right, now every hand's going up. It's another lecture to schedule, right? Soap, toothpaste, clothes, shoes, a bag, a phone for emergencies. I'm not talking about a Rolls Royce, a vacation home in Hawaii, or a flat screen TV. We're talking about basic commodities so that we can go to work and function as a human being. Could you imagine if the workers had the audacity to want to purchase a pair of the sneakers that they had been making for upwards of 25 years? This is what it would cost at the mall in Jakarta, that particular pair that I'm holding, 1.7 million rupiah, about 2/3 of a month's wage. Let me scale that for you so you get it. If you get out of school and you get a job where you're taking home $3,000 a month, and you scale your spending power to the spending power of a worker in this equation, that pair of Nike sneakers is going to cost you $2,000. So can you see how little spending power they have? Now, I'm not a huge fan of Henry Ford. Ford was violently anti-union. Some other things he did I didn't like, but one of the things that I respected about Ford, Henry Ford, the car maker, was that Ford said, I want every worker who's working on my production lines to get paid a wage that would allow them to buy one of the cars that they're making on my production lines. Smart businessman. Right? You've got workers that are producing for a company that has posted record profits, and they still can't afford their most basic needs in the local marketplace. It's what economists call a market failure. Simply, it's bad. And it can be adjusted and fixed with a very small investment on the part of Nike. So what do we want Nike to do? We want them to just pay it. Just pay the workers a living wage. Now sometimes people ask, number one, how much would that be? General rule of thumb, whether it's in the United States or in a developing country, whatever the minimum wage is, at a minimum, you want to get close to a living wage, double it. A better benchmark is to triple it. Now you say that, people say, triple wages? You triple wages for those Nike factory workers? A pair of shoes is going to cost $800. Who's going to want to buy an $800 pair of shoes? Then nobody's going to buy those products. No orders are going to go to the factories. No orders go to the factories. Those factories are going to have to shut down. The factories shut down, all those women are out in the streets. And then they're going to turn to, who knows what, prostitution or dealing drugs. And then how are you going to feel, Mr. Hippie Social Justice Catholic Activist? Has anybody heard those arguments before? Yeah. Yes? Here's why they're nonsense, and particularly for our younger students, here's why it is important for you to do your homework. Because you may be impassioned about something, but if you can't defend it and articulate it with the facts, it doesn't matter. Now, the premise of the argument is if you triple workers' wages, it's going to make the shoes cost $800. Does anyone remember what the labor cost was on the shoes that I had up on the slide? $2.43. Let's round it up to $2.50 for the ease of math. Triple it. What are we at now? $7.50. $7.50 minus $2.50 equals $5. So an $80 pair of shoes plus $5 equals $85. How did we get to the $800 pair of mythical shoes that's going to bankrupt the company, put all the women in the street, and having them turn to prostitution?
Somebody's trying to say that you're going to triple the cost of the shoes.
Yes, but the facts don't bear that out, and this is why it's important for us. And I say particularly to students who are activists, you better do a minor in business, because you got to know how to speak this language. Because it would be the same way as if you were trying to push back or do some kind of organizing or project in a country that spoke Spanish or spoke Chinese, and you just are standing there and you just keep speaking English. If you ain't speaking the same language, you're not going to be heard. So you've got to take, if we see the globalization of capitalism, the globalization of trade, the globalization of money as one of the greater threats to our environment, to our economy, then we better know the terms that get utilized in the conversations that are had around those discussions. Now, there's actually a company that's already doing this. It's not on the footwear side. They've started on the apparel side, called Altagracia. Altagracia, interestingly enough, it's a plant down in the Dominican Republic. It used to be a Nike plant. And Nike shut it down because the workers were organizing and pushing for really good wages and working conditions. There's a company called Knights Apparel. Probably never heard of them. They're one of the biggest players in the collegiate bookstore market. And the guy who was the CEO had a bit of a metanoia a number of years ago. A huge change of heart. He been kind of running things the way Phil Knight runs things. And I believe his wife may have passed away and his son got very sick, or vice versa. And he just took a big step back from this family crisis and said, I've got to do something other than just make a lot of money. And he had heard about what was happening with the student activism, and he connected with the United Students Against Sweatshops and another group called the Worker Rights Consortium, and he ended up buying this plant in Dominican Republic, and he launched this brand called Altagracia. They pay their workers a living wage. They get paid 3 times the minimum wage. The brand owns the factory, so they have direct negotiations with the union. They sell their products on more than 400 campuses around the country. And the price point and the quality is the same as any other brand. So if we had, I was actually wearing an Altagracia shirt yesterday. If you had my Altagracia St. Joe's University t-shirt here, next to a Nike t-shirt, next to a Gap t-shirt, next to a Russell Athletic t-shirt, same quality, same price point. So if this little rinky-dink company can do it, remember the slide that I had up that showed the market share? You couldn't calculate the line small enough to represent Altagracia on that graph. If they can do it, Nike can do it. But Nike's not going to do it out of the goodness of their heart. They're going to need to be brought there kicking and screaming. Because when we look at what Nike says about workers' wages, they are a little schizophrenic on this issue. Right, here's the chairman of the board, founder of Nike, Phil Knight. Reporter says, Mr. Knight, do you feel comfortable that your workers are making a living wage? Absolutely, no question about it. Show me the data upon which you are making this assertion. Nike's corporate responsibility report says some worker advocates suggest that a living wage should be paid. We do not support this approach. Why wouldn't you support it if the chairman and founder of the company says it's already absolutely happening? Former director at Nike says they have the right issue but the wrong company. There's that PR line again, right? We raised wages 70% in Indonesia. What he doesn't tell you is that this was during 97, 98 when the Asian market crashed, particularly Southeast Asian market crashed, and the Indonesian rupiah, the currency, plummeted on international currency markets. It was not worth the paper it was printed on. So while yes, they gave workers a raise, because of the exchange rate, they were still making a killing. So a little bit of fuzzy math that he doesn't get into when he makes this statement. He then goes on to say, we have a code that applies globally and that provides wages that far surpass regional or national minimum wages. That's a flat-out lie. And I would encourage you to exercise what in academia they call the hermeneutic of suspicion. Question everything. Go to Nike's website, pull up their code of conduct. I will guarantee you that that is not in it. He's lying. So I wrote to Nike, and I'm like, look, Phil Knight says this about wages, your corporate responsibility report says this, your PR statements say this, data manager's saying this. Why don't you just disclose what you're paying people at all your factories? And then we would have a baseline of data that we could have a real conversation about. So Nike writes me back, and they say, Nike does require that the factories manufacturing our products comply with local legal minimum wages. And this is something we aim to verify in our auditing process. However, because factories are not Nike-owned, it is not possible for us to mandate what wages should be paid by the factories to workers. Moreover, this data is not something we collect. It is owned and managed by factories, which is why Nike cannot disclose workers' wage rates. Let's start with the second sentence first. It is not possible for us to mandate what wages should be paid by the factories to workers. We raised wages 70% in Indonesia. So which is it? Can you mandate it or can't you? Nike does require that the factories manufacturing our products comply with local legal minimum wages, and this is something we aim to verify in our auditing process. Do we have any accountants here by any chance? Anyone studying accounting? Okay. When you're doing an audit at a very basic level, what is it that you're gathering? You're gathering data. It could be about anything with regard to the company, but you're gathering data, right? In this case, they're saying we are gathering data. We have to verify in our auditing process by gathering data that companies are paying at least the minimum wage, because if not, they'd be breaking the law, right? So in order for them to gather that data, they've got to have data on all the wages at all the factories, right? Moreover, this data is not something we collect. They're lying in the same paragraph. So can you see why I started this segment saying Nike's a little schizophrenic on the wage issue? All right. Now, can workers fight back? Absolutely. And they have. Sometimes successfully, sometimes not successfully. Just real quick, sometimes you'll hear people say, those workers over there, what else would they be doing if Nike wasn't there? Nike's a godsend. They love Nike. I always find that one comical. What else would they be doing? Yeah, Indonesia's only been around for a couple thousand years as an archipelago, as a modern nation since the 50s, but you know, the people go back thousands of years. Culture, food, art, music. Thank God the white jocks from Oregon showed up 25 years ago to save those little brown people. Right? The arrogance. And as far as them loving Nike, this was a demo in the streets of Jakarta. They've got Nike as the devil in that poster. So I'll just leave that at that. But if workers are fighting back, traditionally what's happened is the workers go to the subcontractors, to the management. They're like, we want a raise. And the management goes, we can give you a raise, but we can't afford it. Nike's been paying us the same amount for a pair of sneakers for 25 years. You can't get blood from a stone. What do you want us to do? You want a raise? Don't ask us. Go ask Nike. And then they catch themselves going, no, please. Don't go ask Nike. Because everybody's afraid of the big bad boss. But sometimes the workers have the courage, and even the managers join with them, and they demand better wages from Nike. And Nike's response traditionally has been, look, the workers that are asking for a raise, that's fine, but they're coming to the wrong people. Don't come to Nike. If you want a raise, go to the government. And if the government raises the minimum wage, we'll do whatever we need to do to comply because we want to be good global corporate citizens. Who's heard that argument before? It's the governments in these countries that have to fix those problems. Heard that? Here's where I disagree. Okay. What's your first name again? Dylan. We're going to take you out of Maine. I'm going to get you a job. When you graduate, you're going to work at Nike Corporate. You're going to make commercials, Dylan. You're going to work in the marketing department. You're a really creative guy. You're very good at what you do. And let's say that Dylan is working at Nike 5-6 years. One day he might ask his boss for a raise. Is that a revolutionary concept? People do it all the time, right? You work hard, you're adding value, you want to get paid for it. All right. So let's pretend I'm your boss. Dylan comes in, asks me for the raise, and I go, Dylan, listen, you're awesome. You're one of the best guys I've had on my team since I've been working here, but I got to tell you, you came to the wrong person if you want a raise. If you want a raise, don't come to Nike. You know where you go? Washington, D.C. Yeah. Go to Congress. Excuse me. And if Congress raises the minimum for mid-level ad executives, we'll do whatever we need to do to comply because we want to be good global corporate citizens. Who thinks this sounds ridiculous? Yes? Because in this scenario, who does Dylan work for? Does he work for the U.S. government? No, so we shouldn't be asking the government for his raise. Who does he work for? Nike. So who should he get his raise from? Nike. These Indonesian factory workers, do they work for the Indonesian government? No. So they shouldn't get their raise from the government. Who do they work for? Nike. Now, I did my presentation a number of years ago at Furman University in South Carolina. The cross-country coach at Furman was in the audience. He was the cross-country coach in his second career. It was a career in retirement, really. He was one of the original 12 guys that started the Nike Corporation. So smoke was coming out of this dude's ears before I said word one that night, right? And when we got to this point in the presentation, and I asked the audience, who do these workers work for? And the audience, like you, rightfully says, Nike. He jumps up, subcontractors. And what he's trying to do in that statement is create moral distance for the responsibility of what's going on. And I said, Coach, I get where you're coming from. And I might even agree with you if it wasn't for what Nike has said on the issue. Here's Phil Knight, chairman of the board again, founder of Nike. Reporter says, these employees that are affected are technically not Nike employees, they're employees of subcontractors. But you said basically you accept responsibility for the conditions under which they work. No question, says Phil Knight. And we really look at it as more than a subcontracting relationship. It's really a partnership. Not in the legal sense, but in the moral sense. It's a strong statement. Former VP, Dusty Kidd, this was in direct response to me and my campaigning on this. He said it's real simple. Phil and I kind of defined it about 2 years ago. Those workers, we should consider them Nike employees. So that's our responsibility. We should consider them Nike employees. Do you know what that sounds like to me? We should consider them Nike employees. So if they're Nike employees, who's on the hook for getting them their raise? Nike. So we need to hold these big-time executives accountable for the statements they have made publicly. Now, I think there are other groups of stakeholders that have some moral culpability in this. The big-time athletes, like LeBron James. What LeBron James makes during the 2 hours of one basketball game, wearing the Nike products, would take a factory worker that made those products 9.5 years of work at the factory to make the same amount of money. Now, I am not against LeBron getting paid. I just think this is a little out of balance. So we need to hold these big-time athletes accountable for promoting these products and not pushing back and demanding more for the workers that make the products. Now, we may have a bit of moral righteousness stirring up in us right now, and we're pointing the fingers at the big-time executives and the big-time athletes, but then we've all got to look in the mirror and ask ourselves here in this community, have we turned our student athletes into walking billboards for transnational corporations? And is that right? Should they be that? And that's a conversation that you have to have as a community. And I know you're not in a situation where this is a giant multi-million-dollar endorsement deal. You actually have a lot more control at a school of this size to not have our student athletes be walking billboards or running billboards. So what do we do? Is anybody feeling a little bit overwhelmed at the moment? Yes? Anyone feeling guilty? There's the Catholic in me stirring the guilt up, right? Anybody have this on the presentation? Oh my God, all my clothes are made of sweatshop, what am I going to do? Anybody think that? Yes? Okay, I don't want to leave you feeling that, like, hey, the world sucks, thanks for having me, good night. I want to give you very concrete things that you can do to help push along this campaign, get us closer to justice for the workers. So this is where I'd love for you to take out your cell phones if you have them. If you don't, you can go old-fashioned with a pen and a piece of paper. But if you got your phones, first thing I want to talk about is boycotting Nike products. I do not say this lightly. I have done some version of this presentation since 1997. And it's only in the last year and a half to 2 years that I have included this component of boycotting the products, and that's because workers are asking for it. Okay, I always felt that it was their call on this. So now they're okay with it, so I would encourage you to boycott Nike products in any way that you can. Now, I don't want you to do it in a vacuum, like, I'm never going to buy Nike again. Great. You feel good about it. What did that do? You've got to exercise your voice. So one of the ways I want you to do that is you can send an email right now. This is the personal email address of the CEO of the Nike Corporation. His name is Mark Parker. His email address is mark.parker@nike.com. And you might tell Mr. Parker, I'm sitting in the front row at one of Jim Keady's presentations. I just learned about your sweatshop practices, and I'm never going to buy one of your products again until you pay your workers a decent wage. Thank you. Now, sometimes, people say, come on, the guy's the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. He's never going to get my email. I know he's getting them because I've already been contacted by another executive at Nike. Jim, can you please stop asking the students to write to Mark? Right? So send your emails off. Okay, another thing that you can do is stop endorsing Nike at the institutional level. All right, I showed this picture before. So what could our sports teams here do? You can do what Father Ryan High School, this Catholic high school down in Tennessee did. They found it's a great story. It's a little old lady who lives near the school, and she sewed these patches for them. You know, they're a Catholic school, so they have this Jerusalem cross means something to their school. They had those patches made up, and they sew them over every corporate logo on every uniform, on every tracksuit, all the gear that they have. And they've said, we're only going to advertise for Father Ryan. Until one of these companies lines up with our values, this is an imperfect statement, but it's a statement that we're going to make. Okay, so I would encourage you to do that. There was another big deal. I did my presentation this fall at Georgetown University. Big time athletics, big time basketball. John Thompson, who put Georgetown basketball on the map, he actually went, of course, he's on the board of directors at Nike. They paid for him to go to Indonesia years ago, and he came back saying, yep, everything's okay. Right? Didn't even scratch the surface, total PR stunt. So Georgetown had some real culpability in this. And I did my presentation there. These young women student athletes got really fired up. The next day, they were covering up the logos. We got it out on the wire. Stories are being done. They've stayed with the issue. They've reached out to me a number of times. I've given them technical and tactical support, got them connected with other groups that could help them. And this is Isabel. You know, you can see the tape over the Nike logo and her shoes there. That's a famous sports journalist. His name is David Zirin. He did a podcast with her yesterday, the day before. I think it's coming out Thursday this week. And they were able to get the university president just sent a letter to Nike basically saying, we're not renewing our contract with you unless you do this, this, and this. That's a big deal. Okay? This is the first domino to fall. If you have a school like Georgetown, cut a deal with Nike over labor rights issues. Right? Just within, they're a Catholic Jesuit school, just within the Jesuit schools alone, there's 28 Jesuit colleges and universities. They all start following suit. Georgetown, Creighton, Santa Clara, St. Joe's. I mean, you'd have some big athletic programs that would really start leveraging some pressure. Okay? And you could be one of the dominoes in that. Again, you don't have a deal, a multi-million-dollar deal like they do, but you can let your voice be heard in any and every way possible. Okay, next thing you can do is speak out. If you wanted to say something on our Facebook page, it's facebook.com/teamsweat. You can go on your phones right now, pull it up, like the page. If you want to come up, take a picture afterwards, post it up there, say that you're joining the team, that'd be great. If you have, how many people here have friends? You have friends? Yes? Right. Not everybody's raising their hands. You guys should all hug each other and be friends by the end of this, right? If you have friends in other schools or other communities, union halls, churches, and you would like me to come do this presentation, okay, you can send me an email, jim@educatingforjustice.org. Just give me some of the details, get me connected with your friend, and hopefully that can happen. All right? You can send a text, those friends that you claim to have, right? Send a text message, an email, call them later, send smoke signals, whatever you do to get in touch with them, right? tell them about what's going on, and encourage them to check out the Facebook page, the video. If you like the video at the beginning of the presentation, Behind the Swoosh, that's up on YouTube, so you can find that link. Just do a search for Behind the Swoosh, you find the link, you send that off in a text message, and it's an easy way to educate 3, 4, 5, 6 of your friends before you go to bed tonight. Okay, another thing you can do is spread the word. You can educate people on your campus. These were students at one of the bigger universities in Indonesia. They had me do this presentation, and then they blanketed the campus with big banners and posters and flyers, and that's something you can do. Moving forward, it's getting a little bit late in the year. Maybe you gear up towards the end of this year, and if you're an underclass man or woman, you gear up for the fall, where it's something that you're really trying to educate people about right at the outset of school. If you really want to get on board, and you're like, hey, I want to organize around this issue and really do something on campus, there's a national group called the United Students Against Sweatshops, and I would encourage you to check them out. It's usas.org. And if you wanted to form a chapter here, you send them an email, they'll get an organizer up here and help you do that. And they've been working on this issue since the late 90s. This and a range of other economic justice issues that are specific to college campuses. So some examples, like they help to fight in solidarity with cafeteria workers, maintenance workers, to get them better wages and working conditions. Because unfortunately, despite the ideals that are preached in the ivory tower, we don't always walk our own talk. So these students help build student and worker power to get workers the justice they deserve. And I encourage you to learn more. And I'll leave this up as I open up the floor for questions. Now what I'm going to do, just questions for maybe about 5 or 10 minutes. I will stay longer if you have more questions. But before I open it up for questions, I want to put this out there. If you disagree with something that I've said tonight, or if you disagree with everything that I've said tonight, let's talk about it now while I'm in front of you and we can have a really constructive conversation. The last thing I want is an angry anonymous email in 2 or 3 days calling me a communist. All right, so anything you want to put out there, I've probably heard it before because I've done this hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. So feel free to ask any question you want. Okay, so questions, thoughts, or comments? Don't all ask at once, it makes it difficult for me. Yes?
Two unrelated questions. As somebody who went to a Jesuit school, Holy Cross, what's their record?
Holy Cross? Yeah, Holy Cross. I believe that Holy Cross is still wearing their Nike stuff. I've done my lecture at Holy Cross a couple times. You know, it's just, it really, I plant the seeds and then see if they're going to take root with students. You know, and on a couple campuses, it's really happened. In Georgetown, it happened in a big way this fall. Holy Cross didn't take root.
And the second question, New Balance. I'd like to think of them as a little bit better. They at least employ people in the team.
They are marginally better in that they produce some of their products here in the United States. I have a pair of New Balance 990s, which are produced here in the USA. They also produce, I've met New Balance workers who tell the same horror stories as all the Nike workers, both in Indonesia, Vietnam, China as well. So they're still exploiting workers in developing countries. The other thing that was really disappointing, I don't know if you follow, I'm a junkie for these kinds of issues and political issues. So there's a trade deal that's being negotiated right now, the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. New Balance has been silent on it. And the reason they were silent, it just came out this past week, is because Obama promised them a big military contract for sneakers. And now they're reneging on the deal, so now they're getting involved in the conversation. Yep. So better, but if we're grading it on a curve, yeah, New Balance might be like a B-, but really, if we weren't on the curve, they're all Fs. New Balance might be a D-. Okay. Other questions? Yes?
In the outdoor industry, do you know anything about Patagonia?
Patagonia, while they have great marketing around this stuff, they're producing in the same kind of conditions, unfortunately. I haven't had any direct conversations with them. I know other people who do this stuff have. Seems they may be a little more open, but just all you gotta do is look to see where your products are made.
What U.S. companies,
Yeah.
outdoor or sports?
Yeah, we're not at a point yet where I could say, okay, you're going to the mall this weekend and you want to get some new outdoor gear, here's where you go. There's some smaller niche companies online, but we have to have a longer, broader view. Here's the example that I use with people. So I'm 44 years old. I graduated high school in 1989. If we went back, well, let me ask this first. How many people here have eaten something organic in the last month or two? Eaten something organic? Look around the room. Almost every hand is up, right? If you asked that question my senior year in high school, 1989, 900 guys in the school. You know how many hands would have gone up? One. Matt McDougald, one of my best friends. Right? If you're a Yankees fan by any chance, his dad used to play for the Yankees, 5-time All-Star, McDougald was great. But we used to go to Matt's house and be like, where does your mom buy this stuff? Right? Organic root beer, seaweed chips. Mrs. McDougald was 25, 30 years ahead of the curve. The organic industry, $30 billion a year industry now. You go into any supermarket and you go into the cities, any corner bodega, and there's something organic in there, right? Didn't exist 25, 30 years ago. We're going to see the same thing with sweatshop free and fair trade clothing. We're 20 years in just on the activism component. So the modern environmental movement started with Rachel Carson's book Silent Spring in '63, and now we are well over half a decade, or half 100 years out, 50 years plus out. And we just have gotten to the point where there's market-based options for you. I'd like to see it accelerate a little bit quicker because of the pace that we can share information. And I think we will reach that tipping point where you'll be able to go to the mall. Or, for me, I think about my 7-year-old daughter. She'll be able to go to the mall when she's, a teenager in her 20s, and there'll be a range of options. So we got to keep doing the grassroots education component to build up the demand so that the entrepreneurs step in and fill the void. Yes?
How do you think working conditions compare in Mexico to Indonesia?
In my experience in doing research and talking to colleagues of mine that have done this kind of research in Mexico, very similar. Mexico actually has a lot more apparel production than it does shoe production. And one of the big components for the shoes is the rubber. There's a reason why, when you look over the course of the last 30 years, that the percentages may change, but for the most part, China, Indonesia, Vietnam. That's where it gets done. It's not just about labor. It's about materials, shipping, infrastructure, things like that. Mexico, way more heavy on the apparel side.
So does the shoe start in Indonesia right from scratch to the finished product?
When you say from scratch,
the rubber?
Could, yes. It depends. Just like anything, any business that you have, you're sourcing from a range of different sources. Hey, I may get my rubber from you on any given week, and then something happens and you're short on rubber. I had an increased order, so I got to go over here to another supplier. I may have to even go to another country to get things supplemented in any given week. But here's what's crazy. When you go to the mall in Jakarta, like those shoes, I was holding that one pair of shoes, almost every pair of shoes on the entire wall of that store, if you take them off and look at where they're made. Now, Indonesia, third largest producer of shoes in the world for Nike. And if you dropped a pin at the mall where I was, at the Senayan City Mall in Jakarta, and you just went out like this, maybe a 20-kilometer radius, you would hit well over a dozen shoe factories. Not one sneaker on that wall was made in Indonesia. They're importing them from Vietnam and China because of the language of the trade deals, because everything made in the export processing zone has to go out. It's nuts. It's not sustainable. It's just crazy how it's set up. Because it's not rational, grounded human beings that are setting the rules for trade. It's corporate sociopaths. And the everyday person doesn't have a seat at the table going, yeah, that's kind of nuts. We should probably set that up differently.
Is it differences in currency also? Maybe?
Oh yeah, manipulating the currency markets? Sure. Yep. Other questions, thoughts, or comments? Yes?
Do you dovetail with other organizations, like I remember some group is supposed to be working for the benefit of children, and what I'm seeing in your film is a lot of hazard to children
Sure.
as well.
You said Kiwanis Club?
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
international.
Yep. No, I know. I've done. Yeah, one of my fraternity brothers actually years ago brought me in to speak to his group during a lunch meeting. I haven't done that much other than that. As a very small, I'm a one-man NGO, and I do this. Unfortunately, I do it part-time now. My father passed away 3 years ago, and I had to take over the family business from my mom. I said, "I'll give you 3 years," so we're kind of getting to the end of that. And so this has just been part-time for me in the last 3 years, and now it's even further on the back burner because a month ago I declared that I'm running for Congress. So, my goal is to be in a spot where I'm not having this conversation, not that I don't love being here with you, with 50 people at a university campus. I'm having this conversation on the floor of the House where these trade deals get hammered out. Right? Well, part of them gets hammered out, then they get hammered out behind closed doors at the WTO meetings. But being a voice for issues like this for the people on the floor of the House of Representatives to really fight for what's right. So I don't know if I'll be doing that much more mobilizing at the grassroots level, pulling those different groups together. What I would encourage you to do, if that's a connection you want to make, the group that I put up, the United Students Against Sweatshops, usas.org, usas.org, I would encourage you to get in touch with them and kind of present this as a potential organizing idea. Because they've got a full staff, full-time, working on this every day. Okay. Yes?
Could the trash that you see in the piles, can that be recycled?
Absolutely.
That's that kind of material that...
Yep, so here's the crazy part. So I did this talk, 2002 I think it was. I did it at the law school at the University of Virginia. And in the front row, there were 5 or 6 people that were from a company, McDonough, blah, blah, blah. It's like 3 other names after that. McDonough's the main guy. McDonough Design is known around the world. Cutting edge environmental design. They actually designed Nike's corporate campus in Europe, which is very environmentally friendly, meets all the LEED standards. I don't know if you follow environmental design. So these McDonough people had designed for Nike their closed-looped manufacturing plant. There's not supposed to be any waste. They were in tears when they saw this. Like, what did we do this for? Like, we put our heart and soul into developing, a cutting-edge closed-loop manufacturing system, so this doesn't happen. But that's what Nike talks about in their PR statements, and this is what happens 13,000 miles away where nobody's looking. So, one, if they actually did their closed-loop manufacturing, that would be minimized significantly. But if they didn't, and they kept it at business as usual, yeah, you can recycle that stuff. They can melt it back down, right? And they probably wouldn't use it for higher-end shoes because of the quality standards, but you can reuse it and make flip-flops out of it. There's a range of you. Melt it down and make it whatever you want to make rubber out of. There's a whole range of things.
Would that in the closed loop system, would that be able to be done in-house at that factory, or would it have to be sourced out to a different location for it to be recycled?
Look, if they wanted to figure it out, they could figure it out. Here's one of the examples of it. Whatever the problem is, right? Whether it's figuring out, hey, can we recycle this stuff in-house? Do we got to do it outside? How do we put a trade deal in place that works for everybody? The example I use, all right, here's my iPhone. Made in a sweatshop in China. $4 of labor costs went into this $700 phone. All right, it's crazy in itself. But I touch this screen. It reacts to my finger. Now, if I'm in Indonesia or in Vietnam, half a world away, I'm standing there, I get on the Wi-Fi machine, right? And I do this, and it reacts to my finger that hits these little icons that speaks to this wafer board that's inside of it that's just got little copper nodules and line. You ever break one of these open, you see, it's nuts. And it beams up to a satellite, thousands and thousands of feet above us. And then it beams down into wherever my 7-year-old daughter is back in New Jersey, and we talk to each other like I am on the deck of the Starship Enterprise, right? Star Trek level stuff. If we can figure this out, we can figure out how to manufacture shoes and have some scrap shoe rubber left over and how we deal with it in-house. Or we could structure a trade deal that makes sense for workers in the environment. Or we could figure out how to make a pair of sneakers and have a company generate $30 billion and not have the workers who made those sneakers live in poverty. It's all about political will. And we have to push back and demand this of the people that are running these corporations. We have a voice. We can exercise that power. And it is imperative that we do that. Other questions, thoughts, or comments? Speak now or forever hold your peace. I leave at like 6:30 in the morning.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You made a reference in the movie to the impact of your faith. I'm just wondering to what extent, do you see the growth of activism among, let's say, Catholics or other people, or do you see a big shift towards more social activism during the current pontificate, or what the current pontiff says?
¿De dónde eres? ¿Qué país? ¿De dónde eres? Where are you from?
I'm Polish.
Oh, Polish. It sounds Latin. Jak się masz?
Bardzo dobrze.
Dobrze? Dobrze. Sounded Spanish. Sorry. So I was going to give you the answer in Spanish. My Polish is horrible. We got as far as I can go, other than Nazdrovia, right? Okay. Pope Francis has changed the game. These issues that I've been passionate about since graduate school in the late 90s are now no longer on the margins. They're mainstream. To the point where you had a major United States presidential candidate invited to the Vatican to speak about wealth inequality. I mean, stuff that I was talking about in grad school through the lens of what's called Catholic social teaching, liberation theology, front and center now. So it's empowered a lot of people like myself that we're not seen as like the pariah out there in the wilderness. Now we were right in the center with the leader of our church saying, workers' rights are important, living wages are important, protecting the environment's important. Not just important, paramount.
Do you see also that kind of awakening in other main world religions? Or
when I talk, so Indonesia is the largest Muslim country in the world, and when I talk to my Muslim friends there, and I would explain to them about Catholic social teaching and liberation theology and this, let me do a quick, I'm thinking like I'm at a Catholic school. Let me take a step back, give you a quick 2-minute lesson on this. So, there is a school of theology within the Catholic Church called liberation theology. It emerged in Latin America in the late 70s, mid to late 70s into the early 80s. This was, for the older people in our audience, the backdrop was the U.S. involvement in trying to overthrow a lot of governments and left-wingers to put in right-wing dictatorships, the military coups, our butchering of people in El Salvador and in Guatemala, where we had a hand in killing 90,000 people. In El Salvador, you had Archbishop Romero, who was shot on the altar by a guy who was trained at one of our military bases, Fort Benning down in Georgia. So that you had people that were doing critical analysis of what was going on. And there was one group that were very radical, and by radical I mean getting to the root of radical Catholic priests and sisters and lay people who were looking at their reality and saying, this is why this is happening, this is where power rests, this is where the injustice is, etc., etc. Then over here, you had very hard-hitting social analysis being done by people in the Communist Party, people who were socialists, academics, not with a religious bent, just looking at why is this happening? Why are people dying? Why is the economy the way it is? Why is the military the way that it is? And what these two groups found is that they consistently had overlap. And it was in the hard-hitting social analysis. So then the Catholics and some Protestants as well were utilizing this hard-hitting social analysis and marrying it to a gospel message that was grounded in the dignity of every human person and building social, economic, and political structures that were grounded in that commitment to the dignity of every human person. And from that conversation was born this school of thought called liberation theology. Now, liberation theology, for most of my lifetime, was seen out here on the edges of Catholicism. It has now been brought into the center by the current Pope, which I think is pretty cool. Catholic social teaching is, and this is how I got into this. I was writing a paper for grad school about Nike's labor practices in light of Catholic social teaching. It's our church's teaching on social, economic, and political issues, and there's very strong language in that teaching about workers' rights to a living wage, about the rights to form unions, about unions' rights to strike, about dealing with workers in good faith and collective bargaining. But it's also known by theologians as our church's best kept secret, because it's dangerous when talked about in light of the status quo. The current Pope is making it less dangerous. So I do think it's empowered a lot of people. And I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful for what is happening both in my faith world and in my political world, where things are being talked about in a way that they, again, have not been talked about in my lifetime. I grew up in the Reagan era. Right? This stuff was not talked about. Yes?
Quick question. What percentage of the gross domestic product of Indonesia is reflected in sweatshops?
I don't know.
Would it be substantial?
Manufacturing, yes. Yeah. I don't like to just pull stats out of my backside. If you want, give me my card, I'll find the answer for you. I don't think it'd be too difficult to find.
The reason why I say that is, a middle class in any third world country needs to have an upward movement.
Sure.
Living wages that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And if it's a significant percentage of that gross domestic product is involved in this sweatshop economy, it seems to me that it even strengthens your positions.
Oh, sure. Yeah, they are not getting ahead. In fact, when you do the analysis, the spending power for a Nike factory worker, and I do it in a very human way. Rent, drinking water, transportation, food, clothes. When you do an analysis like that, from when my first trip in 2000 to my last trip that was in 2014, where I was unfortunately picked up by the immigration police, detained for 2 days, questioned, and deported and banned from the country. In that 14 years' time, the spending power now is weaker for workers than it was 14 years ago. So what the workers talk about, I forget the Indonesian phrase, but they say we dig a hole in front of ourselves today to fill in the hole that's behind us from yesterday in terms of the debt. Problem is, the hole keeps getting bigger on each side. Yeah, the dynamics are the same for our working class, for our middle class families here. Middle class wages, when pegged against inflation, have not risen for American workers since 1973. We've had massive increases in productivity, massive increases in GDP. The Dow Jones is through the roof. All of this money is being generated. But it goes to that 1% and the 1% of the 1%. And that's what is being talked about now on both sides of the political spectrum. That the system's broken. The trade deals haven't helped our workers. They've crushed factory towns. They've crushed our middle class. The question is, I'm not going to advocate for anybody because it's not my place here in this presentation, right? But to raise these questions and say, who's the best positioned person that's in the race right now to push back against this stuff? And you'd want to ask, who has been pushing back against this stuff in their political or professional life for the last 30 years. That's, yes.
So one more question. Do you think that after the elections, this kind of discourse which you sympathize with, or let's say I sympathize with, will stay around, or it will be gone?
No, I think this is here to stay. Because it's on both sides of the aisle. Right? The swaths of the middle class, the working class, and the poor in America are pushing back and saying that the elites, both in business and in politics, have been making promises to us for 30 years, and the check has insufficient funds, to borrow a phrase from Martin Luther King. Right? They want that check cashed. They're going to demand. I don't see this going away on either side of the aisle, which is good. We need it. We need an economic and a political revolution because people work too hard. Right? I run my family's tavern, and I sit behind or stand behind the bar, and I listen to my mostly middle class clientele, and I hear the stories from people that have been working that should be moving into retirement, right? But their retirement savings are gone because they got crushed when the subprime mortgage crisis happened and the whole global economy almost went down in 2008. Or they got crushed because their home got squished during Hurricane Sandy and you had inept government that didn't fix the problem. Quick side note on that, I don't know if it made it up this way, but some of you may have heard when Governor Christie screamed at the guy to sit down and shut up. Did you see that in the news? That was me. I was standing up for Hurricane Sandy families because, 2 years out, now we're almost 4 years out, and I still have customers who come into my family's place that aren't back home yet. So, yeah, I don't think people are going away on this one.
When you told us to go to our phones, I couldn't remember the address. I typed your name on Google, and that was the first.
Yes. Sit down and shut up moment is, I'm either famous or infamous, depending on what your political stripe is. All right. Any other questions, thoughts, or comments? Yes. Come back to you. Go ahead.
You're amazing.
You're amazing.
24 years old, right? You're about 24 when this all started, and you just...
I was 20, started grad school when I was 26, 27.
And you made a decision to move forward on something like this rather than...
Yeah.
That's amazing. You're amazing.
Thanks. I appreciate that. But I tell people all the time, and I'm humbled when people say that. It makes me feel a little weird, but I'm no different than you.
Oh, yes, you are.
I'm not. Okay? And I especially tell this to students, right? We have the posters of our heroes up in the office or in our dorm rooms or whatever, and there's Martin Luther King or Gandhi, whoever it is, and we use a quote from them to wrap up our research paper to just tighten it all up at the end. They were human beings, just like us. Okay, so you get faced with choices every day. You just got to decide, am I going this way? 2 paths cross in the woods, and I took the one less traveled, and it has made all the difference. Right? So we get faced with these challenges all the time. So you can do it too. All right? That's one of the things that one of the major political candidates is saying. It's not me, it's us. If we're going to fix this, we're all in it together. So we've all got to stand up in our way, whatever that way is, and let our voice be heard and be part of the solution. Yes?
I was just asking about the actors. Are they really getting involved in the Nike also?
No.
I see them in other, where they're looking at free trade and all.
Yeah. Over the years, it has been very challenging to get either big-time athletes or actors, models. I remember I did a demonstration in Fashion Week in New York City. God, it must be 15 years ago now. And trying to talk, when I put on a suit, I kind of look like either a Secret Service agent or a guy that'd be working on Wall Street. So I can kind of walk around and people don't stop me. So I went into the back and I'm like with all the models for Fashion Week and trying to talk to them these clothes. It was, I forget what the main company was, but doing the same stuff. We're just trying to get models aware of this. This is the companies you're promoting. And even if they might say in that conversation, I'm sympathetic, they're not doing anything. Right? It's frustrating. I have friends who are pro athletes, I personally reached out, nothing. And we get mad, but then I throw it back. What's your first name again? I'm sorry.
Lisa.
Lisa, if I said to you, look, keep doing what you're doing here at the university. You like your job, right? Okay. So you're going to be Lisa. You're going to do your Lisa thing every day. And while you're doing it, I'm going to give you all the coolest clothes to wear that you want to wear anyway. You don't have to buy them anymore. I'm giving them to you. And just because you've got your Lisa going on, and people want to do what you do and be like you, I'm also going to write you a check for $5 million this year. It's on the table. You going to ask me any questions about where those clothes are made? All right. So tonight, I don't have access to any of those athletes. I don't have access to any of those actors or actresses. I've got access to Lisa. So what are you going to do? What's the stand you're going to make? What's the action you're going to take? Because we can point out there, right? Or we can look in the mirror. See, what am I going to do to take my stand today? And I think that's a good way to wrap this up. And I want to encourage you to take that stand, to exercise your voice, to be the change we wish to see in the world, as Gandhi had said, because only 2% of the world gets access to a college education every year. So that puts all of us who are college educated, or being college educated, into the global elite. Now you may not feel elite when on a Friday you're jonesing for money for beer and pizza, right? But the fact that you have a safe place to sleep tonight, you have warm, dry clothes to wear, you had 3 meals today if you so chose, and you're getting a college education at a great institution here in the United States, puts you so far ahead of the other 99% of people on the planet that I would argue that you have a moral responsibility to them to use your education, your gifts, your talents, and your passion to not just make your life better for yourself and those people immediately around you, but to use your education, your gifts, your talents, your passion, and your voice to speak up for those that don't have a voice. To go out these doors, to go back out onto this campus, and then out into the world, and really make a difference with your lives. And leave the world a much better place than you found it. Thank you very much.